This board meeting of the Board of Education for November 17th, 2020 is called to order. For tonight's meeting, any item that will be voted on has been posted as required by state law. This meeting is being streamed live on PPS TV Services website and on Channel 28 and will be replayed throughout the next 2 weeks. Please check the district website for replay times. And I'm going to ask Director DePass to go ahead and open our meeting tonight.
I just figured that, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I want to start by acknowledging that we live, work, and play on the traditional land of Indigenous people who once made their homes along the Columbia and Willamette rivers. We must continue to acknowledge, celebrate, and honor Native American history and heritage. Native people continue to make our city and our region a more dynamic and thriving place for all. Tonight, we'll be voting on a resolution proclaiming the celebration of National Native American Indian Heritage Month. In addition to learning about how tribal history is taught within Portland Public Schools in our study session later tonight. But first, I begin by reading the proclamation. And bear with me. Resolution proclaiming the celebration of National Native American Indian Heritage Month in Portland Public Schools. Native American Indians are descendants of the original indigenous inhabitants of what is now the United States. The Portland metro region rests on the traditional lands of the bands of the Chinook, Multnomah, Clackamas, Tualatin, Molalla, Capoeira, Wasco, Cowlitz, and Cathlamet tribes. These tribes established their communities in a resource-rich area where they traded and fished along the rivers and harvested those natural resources that fed and maintained their families. In the 1950s, under federal relocation policy, a large segment of the Native population in the US was forced to relocate to several major cities, of which Portland was one. This has added to the diversity of the tribal representation in the region. Native American Indian people, whose history is rich with those who positively influence and enrich our nation, our society, our region, our state, and our schools through their entrepreneurship, commitment to community service, deep value of justice and liberty, and social and cultural life. On August 3rd, 1980, President of the United States, George H.W. Bush, declared the month of November as National American Indian Heritage Month, thereafter commonly referred as Native American Heritage Month. Native American Indians have made profound contributions and continue to make advances in education, medicine, art, culture, and public service, and have been a consistent and vital influence in our nation's growth and prosperity. The Portland Metro's Native American Indian community is diverse and growing, with the population estimated to be nearly 70,000. As Portland is a relocation site, PPS students represent more than 150 tribal nations. As such, we are humbled by Native American Indian employee, families, and communities' contribution to the accomplishment of PPS's mission. Understanding Native American history is an important part of celebrating Native American Heritage Month. Background: the Oregon Indian Education Association introduced, and Oregon Governor Brown signed into law, Senate Bill 13, Tribal History, Shared History, in the 2017 legislative session. This bill called upon Oregon Department of Education to develop a statewide curriculum relating to the Native American experience in Oregon, including tribal history, tribal sovereignty, culture, treaty rights, government, socioeconomic experiences, and current events. Tribal history, shared history is one of 11 objectives identified in ODE's American Indian Alaska Native State Plan, in which every school district in Oregon implements historically accurate, culturally embedded, place-based, contemporary, and developmentally appropriate American Indian curriculum. Oregon is one of several states adopting similar efforts to reaffirm the state's commitment in preserving tribal cultural integrity and the education of our citizens. In May 2018, ODE facilitated coordination of the creation of Essential Understandings of Oregon's American Indians, which has been used to develop American Indian curriculum and assessment tools for the 4th, 8th, and 10th grades, aligning with state standards in the following content areas: English, language arts, science, math, social science, and physical education and health. Portland Public Schools Office of Indian Education, Office of Teaching and Learning, and Office of Schools are engaged in this vital statewide work. As of January 2020, the state of Oregon requires implementation of tribal history, shared history within all K-12 school districts throughout the state. The Office of Schools and Office of Teaching and Learning are working together to support the implementation of this curriculum as a foundational and fundamental element of our culturally responsive teaching and learning for the students in Portland Public Schools. Portland Public Schools has a racial education equity policy that states our commitment to affirmatively overcome the educational barriers that have resulted in persistent, unacceptable achievement gap for students of color, and to give each student the opportunity to support to meet his or her highest potential. Closing opportunity gaps while raising achievement for all students is the top priority of the Board of Education, the superintendent, and the district staff. The Portland Public Schools Board of Education believes each and every student is to be celebrated and appreciated for the distinct and vibrant contributions made by sharing cultures, language, ideas, beliefs, and values within a school community. Be it resolved, the Portland Public Schools Board of Education hereby promotes November 1st through November 30th as Native American Indian Heritage Month and encourages staff, students, and community to observe, recognize, and celebrate the culture, heritage, and economic contributions of Native Americans to our Oregon and the United States through culturally relevant activity, and to learn from the past and understand the experiences that have shaped the United States. The superintendent and or his designee shall work with schools in the district to recognize Native American Indian Heritage Month through culturally relevant lessons and activities. Thank you.
Thank you, Director DePass. The board will now bring forward resolution number 6203, resolution proclaiming the celebration of National Native American Indian Heritage Month in Portland Public Schools. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
So Director DePass moves and Director Scott seconds. Ms. Bradshaw, is there any public comment on resolution 6203?
No.
Is there any board discussion on this resolution? I just want to reiterate the things that Director DePass said in the resolution about the impact of Native American culture on our community and on this place. And especially, I was not aware that there were over 150 links to different communities in Native American culture here in Portland. And so again, want to just acknowledge that those, I think oftentimes when I was a kid, we learned about Native American culture as something in the past, and that this is something that is definitely here and now and vibrant and present. And want to thank, I know we've got some students that'll be speaking in a minute, and thank them especially for their contributions tonight. All right, any other discussion on this resolution? Okay, the board will now vote on resolution 6203, resolution proclaiming the celebration of National Native American Indian Heritage Month in Portland Public Schools. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
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 Yes. All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Are there any abstentions? Resolution 6203 is approved by a vote of 7-0, with Student Representative Shu voting
Yes.
Thank you, Nathaniel. Superintendent, would you like to take it from here?
Thank you, Chair Lowry, and to the rest of the board. I appreciate my opportunity to make a remark here. Thank you for acknowledging this month as a time to in particularly recognize and celebrate the culture and heritage of our Native American community. As an example of the work in action that your resolution inspires, I too want to recognize two of our student leaders at Grant High School, who are also members of the Indigenous Peoples Student Union, who are here with us tonight. Please welcome Ani Tate and Livy Buck. And if I may, address the two of them and their classmates. I want to share with you and the community tonight the decision to begin the process of removing and relocating the Fletcher murals from the Grant High School auditorium. Last spring, just before the pandemic shut down our schools, Director Bailey and I had the opportunity to meet with you, former Principal Campbell, your IPSU advisor, and other students at Grant High School. You and your fellow student leaders were incredibly eloquent and clear in your advocacy and rationale as to why the murals should no longer have a place in your learning environment. What struck me deeply was hearing how the continued display of these depictions of Native people have such a negative impact on you and your fellow students. This is precisely the opposite of the intent of the board's resolution this evening, which is to respectfully recognize and celebrate the culture and heritage of Native Americans. I want to ensure that you have a positive and culturally affirming learning experience while at Portland Public Schools. Yesterday, I sent a memo to Principal McGee and to High School Area Senior Director Elisa Shore, sharing my decision and outlining the process to move forward. As part of my decision and in alignment with the goals of our Master Arts Education Plan, the school's leadership will work closely with students to develop and collaborate on a conceptual design for a new mural, one that more appropriately celebrates and better affirms the lived experiences and culture of Native American students. And with permission of the board chair, I would like to request that we invite student public comment at this time and invite Ani Tate and Livy Buck, whose leadership has been instrumental in raising the issue and the impact of the murals at Grant High School, to share a few words on behalf of the students at Grant.
Yes, please.
Thank you for all of that. Everyone, Ani Yanishia. Hello, my name is Ani Tate, and I am the president of the Indigenous Peoples Student Union at Grant. IPSU has been working to remove the Fletcher Memorial murals for over 3 years. Almost a year ago to this day, IPSU co-presidents brought our demands to the school board to remove the murals and replace them with a new mural project led by all the student unions of color at Grant. The removal of the murals has been a long time coming, and I have been involved in conversations about it since my freshman year. 3 years ago, the remodel of Grant begun, and as incoming freshmen at Marshall, we were always told about a perfect, new, updated campus being built that would accommodate all of our needs and foster the flourishment of our education. The only way I saw this promise to be possible was if the murals were removed and new murals that accurately represent students of color were underway. Not only did this not happen, but the plan to restore the murals advanced. Throughout this process, the psychological safety of Indigenous students and staff has been continually harmed due to opposition and stalling from the community, heavily contributed to by members of the Grant Alumni Association. As much as I am excited and relieved for these murals to be removed, it is still only a form of harm reduction. It is my understanding that policy is starting to be drafted to facilitate future situations like this. My hope for future Indigenous students and leaders is that they will not have to be subjugated to convincing people of the validity of harm done to them and of the validity of their personal experiences. IPSU would like to be updated weekly on the progress of the removal and other related plans so that we can all stay on the same page going forward. We would also like a specific date to be given for the start date of the removal and the end date of the removal. Before I end, I want to say thank you to our first club president, my sister, Toli Tate, who was the first to bring the removal of the murals to the attention of the school and first started the work around it. And I want to say thank you to last year's co-president, Jackson Wolf, who has contributed so much time to ensuring the removal. And lastly, I want to say thank you to our club advisor, my dad, who has had to deal with these murals since he started working at Grant 14 years ago. And to the surrounding Indigenous community who has supported us in our steps toward decolonizing our school.
Thank you, Ani. OCO, hi everyone. My name is Livy Buck and I'm a senior at Grant High School and I'm a citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. And as an Indigenous student at Grant and an active member of the performing arts community, I was shocked when I learned of the Fletcher murals for the first time, and even more shocked that I would continue to have to perform next to them as I move through my time at Grant. I am thankful that the process to remove these murals has started, and I am looking forward to seeing the ways that PPS will support Indigenous students as I graduate. As my 3 younger siblings go through high school, I'm glad that they are going to be able to see their school and school district begin to repair the damage that these murals have caused. Like Ani mentioned earlier, it has been very harmful as an Indigenous student to see and hear the hurtful words of the members of the Grant Alumni Association, as well as members of the Grant community. I would like to thank our club advisor, Ray Tate, our club president, Ani Tate, and our past presidents, Tolly Tate and Jackson Wolf, for the hard work and the many hours that they have put towards this project. Thank you to the superintendent and the school board for hearing us speak today. Wado, thank you.
Thank you very much for your continued advocacy and the work that you have done, and for your untiring efforts. And I do appreciate what Ani said about creating a system where you all don't have to work so hard for us to do what is right. So thank you for giving us this opportunity tonight. We are ready to, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, and as a graduate of Grant High School, I'm so glad this is moving forward. It's so just thank you.
I just want to address both of the students, Ani and Livy. I really appreciate your advocacy through this work and your persistence and patience. Grant community and our entire community is better for your work. I'm going to be watching and listening very closely for what you both are up to after these murals have been removed, because I'm sure there's bigger and better fish to fry out there. I'll be watching closely.
Chair, can I say a few words?
Go ahead. Yes, please.
Great. So I wanted to thank Ani and Livy for your advocacy and your passion and your persistence. And I wish Jackson were here tonight, because I can't count the number of times when I'd open up my email and find an email from him asking what the status was. And so appreciate your patience as we work through this. And also your courage to not only raise the issue and share your perspective with the leaders at your school, but also the district leaders. I also want to thank Danny Ledesma for connecting a resolution tonight, recognizing Native American Indian Heritage Month with this action, and then our learning session later. I think this is modeling us as a system being continuous learners. And I hope that the hearts and minds of Grant community members who don't maybe agree with this decision, that they take the opportunity to listen to the words of the students and the perspectives, and to better understand why this action is being taken, and to move forward together as a larger community.
Anyone else want to speak to this before we move on?
I just want to commend the superintendent for acting decisively when this matter first came to us from the student activists. It really came directly to the board, and the superintendent was really clear in saying that he wanted to take this action to act on their demands, because this is exactly what our vision envisions. This is exactly what our portrait of a graduate honors and lays out. And so thank you, Superintendent, for recognizing this issue as a way for us to, as a district, to really live our values and live our vision. So thank you so much. And thanks to Ani and all the student activists. And I hope that we're all kept in the loop in meeting your requests to be updated on a weekly basis.
Thank you, directors, and thank you, students, for keeping us accountable.
All right, this is a big moment in a lot of ways as we live into our values as a district. And we turn now to sometimes something that feels like it's the business and yet also is aligned with our values as we engage in the work of the administration of our district through the consent agenda. So board members, if there are any items you would like to pull, we will set those aside for discussion and vote at the end of the meeting. So first I turn to Ms. Bradshaw and ask, are there any changes to the consent agenda tonight?
No.
All right, board members, are there any items you would like to pull from the consent agenda?
There's not an item I want to pull, but I just would like to raise, we had as additional supplemental materials for the board meeting, the preliminary financial report and the large district benchmarking. I'd like to ask at some point in time that we actually devote some part of a board meeting or a committee meeting to these documents, because staff's put a lot of time into them and I think they're important materials regarding the financial health of our district. So if that could happen at some point in time, or that we get them posted somewhere versus just the supplemental materials to the meeting. I think that Claire Hertz and the team that put them together.
All right, any other items to be pulled or from the consent agenda? All right, do I have a motion and a second to adopt the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Director Constam moves and Director Brim Edwards seconds the adoption of the consent agenda. Is there any board discussion on the consent agenda? Ms. Bradshaw, is there any public comment on the consent agenda?
No.
All right, the board will now vote on resolutions 6204 through 6207. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
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 Yes. All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Are there any abstentions? The consent agenda is approved by a vote of 7-0 with Student Representative Shu voting.
Yes.
Thank you, Nathaniel. All right, we turn now to some further student and public comment. Before we begin, I would like to review our guidelines for comment. The board thanks you and the community for taking the time to attend this meeting and provide comments. Public input does inform our work, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts, reflections, and concerns. Our responsibility as a board is to actively listen. Our board office will follow up on board-related issues raised during public testimony. We request that complaints about individual employees be directed to the superintendent's office as a personnel matter. If you have additional materials or items you would like to provide to the board or superintendent, we ask that you email them to publiccomment@pps.net. Again, that's public comment, all one word, @pps.net. Please make sure when you begin your time with us tonight that you clearly state your name and spell your last name. You'll have 3 minutes to speak, and you will hear a sound after 3 minutes, which means it is time to conclude your comments. Ms. Bradshaw, do we have anyone signed up for student or public comment tonight?
Yes. We'll start with Lucy Kennedy Wong.
All right, welcome, Lucy.
Hi, my name is Lucy Kennedy Wong, spelled Kennedy-Wong. I'm a freshman at Franklin High School and my pronouns are she, her. I would like to voice my concerns on how redistricting will change my high school experience. I have a couple key points on how this will affect me. First, I was not given any information that this big change was going to happen. If my parents weren't so involved, I would never have known that I would be transferring high schools in the next couple of years. I feel like these proposals were made for students with assumptions of how it may affect them, but never asking them directly. Students have the right to be involved with decisions that will impact them. When you make a proposal this large, it is your responsibility to make sure the community is educated and able to have a voice. Second, from my house, it would take almost an hour to get to Madison, and almost another hour to come home. If I had any after-school program, or if I wanted to talk to my teachers, it would make me very late coming home with still homework to do, making lunch for the following day, getting sleep, and any basic hygiene I needed to take care of. Then I would need to get up early the following morning and do it all again. I know what it's like to have a very busy schedule, and it greatly affects my ability to stay focused in school and make friends and how present in the moment I am. It would be very difficult to have any extra time to be active in my community, hang out with friends, or my ability to work at my job. Both my parents work full-time jobs, and we only have one car in the family, which one of them would be using. They do not have the time to drive me the places I need to be. Third, having a neighborhood school is very beneficial. Franklin is 3 blocks away from me, which is about a 15-minute walk. We have a great neighborhood community with lots of kids. I'd be able to get to school early and make connections with classmates before class has started. Not only would it help me make friends, but it would also lower carbon emissions because I would not be taking the bus for hours a day. I hope you will give students the opportunity to weigh in on this matter. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next, we have Kaya Robertson.
Yes. Thank you so much. Hello, my name is Kaya Robertson, spelled Robertson, and I'm a junior at Franklin High School. My pronouns are she, her, and I have 2 sisters in 8th grade at Mount Tabor who would be affected by this change. Ever since middle school, I knew I was going to Franklin. I competed on all the Franklin Cluster sports teams and began to become involved in the Franklin community before I had even left elementary school. The last few years at Franklin have been some of the best of my life so far, and I'm so grateful to have been able to go to a neighborhood school with such a strong community. Students at Mount Tabor have a strong network with Franklin High School, and this makes the transition much easier. Going to a new school is always hard, but for local kids in our area, everyone feels familiar and comfortable with Franklin. It is such a great community with the nearby neighborhoods all feeding to the same place. I found that kids and families bond better when they all attend the same schools. Separating our local neighborhoods and sending kids to different schools divides the community and makes the network of support for students and families much weaker. I also live just a 15-minute walk away from the school, and so do all of my friends. It makes so much sense to walk to school every day, as it is not only environmentally friendly and good for our health, but it is a much needed time to talk with friends and bond. If kids in my neighborhood went to Madison, we would also take the bus and transport to school for 90 minutes a day, with Franklin just sitting there just a 15-minute walk away. Students in the area using public transportation could be subjected to late or overcrowded buses often. With sports and extracurricular activities, students barely get any time at home during the school week. And with transportation time on top of that, many students would be busing back to their homes in the dark. The transportation time is simply unreasonable for a Southeast Portland student. It also makes the day cruelly long, as by my calculations, many kids would have to get up by 6 or 6:30 and not get back home until 7 or 8 if they choose to participate in any sort of after-school activity, like a sports practice averaging 2 hours or a club 1 to 3 hours. I personally feel as a student that I would be deterred from participating in my community and school sports if I could not go home after practice after school. I also feel that many students who start high school at Franklin will not benefit from transferring to Madison. They would have to leave a lot of friends and come into a new environment with new teachers, students, and athletic teams. It is unfair to take students away from a school in which they were thriving. As a student living in this affected area, I feel it is unreasonable to have my sisters and other students move to Madison when the nearby neighborhood school is a great opportunity to participate in an already diverse community. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Deb Miller Landau.
Thank you. My name is Deb Landau, and it's spelled Landau, and I am a Mount Tabor Middle School mom, and my pronouns are she, her. I am also here to discuss the enrollment and program balancing efforts led by the Southeast Guiding Coalition. Thank you for this opportunity. The coalition's stated mandate was to create more equitable solutions for Southeast students at the middle school level, with a focus on reopening Kellogg and converting Harrison. Unfortunately, there has been an egregious breakdown in both process and communication, by which the proposal before you is much broader than it has been described in all PPS communications to date. Somewhere in the last few weeks, it appears that the objectives have changed, and now a rush to reach a final phase 1 recommendation by an arbitrary December 17th timeline is only now reaching the ears of the communities which stand to be greatly impacted by these changes. For example, neither Richmond nor Glencoe Elementary's Mount Tabor Middle School's largest feeder elementary schools are represented on the coalition. The 2 parent coalition members representing Mount Tabor are from Atkinson, whose high school will not be impacted by the new proposal. There is literally no one on the coalition who is actually impacted by several boundary changes, including the redrawing of Glencoe's boundaries and the decision to send Mount Tabor Middle School students to Madison, when the majority of students live within walking distance of Franklin. Second, the timeline has been a moving target. At the October 22nd coalition meeting, there was no mention in either phase of redrawing high school boundary lines, and elementary school boundary adjustments were slated to start in phase 2, not phase 1. Third, the issue of creating racial equity is hugely important for our schools, and I applaud PPS's efforts and commitment to racial equity and social justice. However, it remains unclear that the current plan achieves this when racial disparity is actually increased in other areas' schools. Finally, geography matters. Yesterday, my twins got a letter in the mail from PPS entitled "Heading to High School." It says in bold letters, "Connect with your neighborhood school. Most students find their best fit close to home," and identifies their neighborhood school as Franklin. Students and their families deserve an open and transparent process in reviewing school boundaries. I also understand the tremendous challenges PPS faces with the growing population, ensuring diversity, equity, and access, and ensuring facilities aren't bursting at the seams. But without bringing Northeast schools, magnet schools, and all the language programs into the equation, there is no true rebalancing. I'd like to request that from this board that the Southeast Coalition stick to its original mandate to open Kellogg and convert Harrison, but that it postpone making sweeping changes to elementary and high school boundaries at this time, and then to engage in that process in a more transparent manner with more robust community engagement. The coalition says it wants to, quote, create an enrollment plan centered on student success, end quote. To do that, it needs to take a more holistic view of the geographic boundaries within PPS, look at diverse school indices, enrollment levels, and population growth trajectories. And most importantly, it needs to invite input from all students and families, not just a chosen few. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Christina Tognon.
My name is Christina Tognon, T-O-G-N-O-N. My preferred pronoun is she, her. Thank you for this opportunity to speak about the proposed changes to Franklin feeder schools. I thank the Southeast Guiding Coalition for their efforts to develop feeder patterns for Kellogg Middle School. I and many of my neighbors recognize the situation for middle school students was poor, and we want to be part of that solution. Up until October 27th, Kellogg was the articulated focus for the coalition. However, a significant change occurred between October 27th and the 29th, where the conversation expanded in scope from opening Kellogg to determining which schools will feed to Franklin High School. The change in scope, the lack of equitable process, and PPS's non-transparency for those affected are serious issues. You're losing our trust. Families at Glencoe and Franklin have not been included, even though the proposal will significantly impact them. The coalition is de facto making decisions for students who are not at the table. Overall, process equity and the communication regarding the impacts on high school placements have been extremely poor. Many comments from parents attending last night's Mount Tabor Middle School Tabor Talk included words like blindsided, left out, duped, and deceived. Many expressed feeling angry, frustrated, and confused. What is the actual mandate for the proposed feeder changes for Franklin? Both equity and overcrowding are mentioned. We have asked and have not received sufficient answers about the equity goals and how the proposal supports them. Franklin is a model for how we want our schools to look with a 44% diverse student population. With the change, it would increase to 53%. However, Cleveland would see a further reduction in diversity from a meager 30% down to 28%. Madison would see an influx of white students, decreasing its diversity from 65% down to 53%. I would note that from the beginning, the Southeast Guiding Coalition was billed as just that, a look at the Southeast quadrant. Madison is in the Northeast, and schools currently feeding to it and to Grant need to be all considered at the same time. If Franklin overcrowding is an issue, the proposed changes have little effect on building utilization percentages going from 108 to 107%. The health advantages of walking to school and social emotional support achieved by connecting with neighborhood students are not worth destroying to decrease density by this little. While COVID may have delayed this process, that does not justify making up time by shortchanging our ability to fully engage and understand the impacts. Any decisions affecting high school feeder paths must be put on hold until all stakeholders, including students and families at Mount Tabor Middle, Franklin, and affected elementary schools, are informed so they can have a say. We want to understand how these changes truly provide equity and help families in need, or whether they just change percentages on the PPS charts. Thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Eric Happel.
Eric, I just want to thank you. You sent out your complete testimony with all your research to us ahead of time and said that you've practiced and worked to make sure your thing is at 3 minutes. So I thank you for sort of your self-editing, and yet you're providing to the board all of the content. So thank you so much for that. We really do read those. So you get the gold star of the night.
Thank you. I try to do my best. My name is Eric Happel. That's H-A-P-P-E-L. I use the pronouns he, him. I have 3 daughters in PPS, and they've been in here since kindergarten, and my oldest one is in 11th grade. I want to talk about the COVID in the schools. My question is, what is the data telling us about the consequences of keeping schools online only? And what is the data telling us about the safety of opening in-person schools? The cost of online schools has become increasingly high. We're losing students every single day. Enrollment in PPS in October dropped by 1,500 students. Some of those have gone to other schools. Some of them have gone to homeschool. Some of them have simply stopped education. Hundreds of students in PPE are getting no education, and PPS are getting no education at all right now. They're not logging on. Also, Zoom itself is failing for many students. In a recent article, 50% of Salem Kaiser students have at least one class that they're failing. I don't know PPS's numbers, but I suspect that it is similar. In this process, we are creating a generation of lost Oregon students because Zoom school is unable to deliver what is needed and failing many of our students. However, the good news is opening schools safely is possible, and there is supporting data for this that is just growing. In OHA's data itself, we have 61 open schools in Oregon that have at least one COVID case, considering both students and faculty. On average, it's less than 2 students per school that have, and faculty that have had COVID. The most is 6 in any one school. This itself shows us that it is possible to open schools and they are not super spreaders. In another report from New York, from Emily Oster's dashboard, which has over 2 million data points of staff and students, what we see from the staff and students is they actually have lower infection rates per 100,000 than the communities in which they are. In other words, the schools are teaching us how to be better at protecting ourselves against COVID. So in conclusion, I just want to say and point out our online school for many is failing. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. There's Fs and people dropping out of school. School can be open safely, as evidenced in Oregon and other places throughout the country. There are hybrid models out there, and we just need to figure out which one might be appropriate for us. I'll just finalize this by saying I have a 6th grade daughter who literally saw a friend for the first time, any friend, she's seen nobody in 6 months in person this past weekend. And seeing how happy that made her and thinking about how I want other kids to be able to experience that as well as the learning is so important. The cost of not opening our schools is simply too high emotionally and academically. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Alex McIntosh. Alex, are you here? See if I can see you. All right, we'll come back to Alex. We have Venna Rainwater.
Thank you. I'm Vina Rainwater. My last name is Rainwater. I have a son at Wrigler who is in 1st grade, and I use she, her pronouns. I was really excited to hear what the gentleman before me was saying, and I'm proud of all of you for writing things down. I was not that prepared. And basically I'm here because I want to know what the district is planning. You know, I think that as far as we can tell, there's no end in sight. Certainly we have vaccines, but it sounds like masks and COVID are going to be a part of our lives for a while. And as a parent of a 1st grader who is trying to do online school, this is not working. It's not working. And we're all struggling and suffering and not together. We're struggling and suffering alone. And I need to hear that the district is thinking about what can happen next. How can we be creative? How can we find solutions where the students can participate in learning activities in person without igniting an enormous amount of risk? Our school has a huge exterior covered area that would be a great place for kids to sit and do reading for 20 minutes. I mean, I would happily take my kid to school for 20 minutes for him to interact with some teachers and some students. So I just want to see that there is some creativity and some thought that's going into what does this look like if we are not getting out of this year, obviously not. If we're not getting out of this in 2021, what are we doing? And I don't feel like I'm hearing anything about this. I'm not hearing any plans to be creative, to come up with different ways of using the buildings. So let us know what you're thinking.
And just to be clear, off the cuff testimony gets a gold star too. I think this is a hard thing to do, to come and speak to the board. So we appreciate however that happens. I just wanted Eric to know that we do read those other pieces, and that it's hard when you have so much to say to get it down to 3 minutes, and we appreciate that effort. So thank you.
Thanks. Okay, we have Nate Sandvik.
Thanks. I guess I'm kind of off the cuff also. I'm Nate Sandvig, spelled S-A-N-D-V-I-G. Certainly appreciate the opportunity to comment to the board. I was visiting with my friend who's former president of the Sacramento Board of Education, and I was like, boy, aren't you glad you're not on the board anymore, with just COVID and the difficulty there. And, you know, I guess no good deed goes unpunished, and certainly appreciate your tireless work when it comes to addressing some of the challenges of our time. And I'm glad to hear Eric, and I didn't catch her name, just in terms of talking about the elephant in the room. So I guess maybe I'll be on cleanup and just kind of echo some of the, I mean, there's certainly the science out there and the experts, but just coming together in terms of, making some judgment and some decisions. And I'm a single dad, have 4 kids, a 4-year-old, a kindergartner, a 2nd grader, and a 5th grader. And I just haven't heard anything in terms of a plan or a path forward, in terms of how long it's going to take to put something together. If we had to hit the green light tomorrow, do we have a plan in place? In terms of having what it's going to take, how much money, how much space, is there some sort of task force that's identified the needs and the resources? Certainly I feel like there's a lot of parents, certainly on both sides of the issue with, I'm not putting my kids in school unless it's safe, but just, what is that plan? And certainly on my side, definitely advocating getting kids back into the classroom. And on a personal note, I spent about $1 billion in Iraq, and so I don't think money is really an issue. It's just kind of a matter of priorities with getting our kids in the classroom. And you read a lot of these articles. I have friends and family, they're back in classrooms in other states. It's happening, it seems like, in other countries. And we can certainly put a man on the moon. I feel like that it would be really nice to get our kids back into the classroom, instead of it seems like the only thing that's open are bars and restaurants, which would be maybe a terrible classroom. But looking to the board and others in terms of leadership, as a parent advocating getting kids back into the classroom, what it's going to take. There's certainly a lot of support. Again, just kind of really interested in what this plan is, and how we can get kids back into the classroom. So it's not an easy job, but look forward to hearing how this is going to happen, given it doesn't seem like it's ending anytime soon. Thanks.
Thank you. That was everybody we have. We want to go back to Alex. Alex, or did you make it? Looking at the list here.
If Alex is here, we ask you to wave at us just in case we're missing you. And I think the iPhone is Director Constam, correct? No? Do we know who the iPhone is that's here? If that might be Alex.
I think that might have been the person who testified second to last.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, trying to figure out where we all are. Thank you, Andrew. Okay, I really appreciate everyone's coming and speaking. I know that we spent quite a bit of time last meeting talking about where we are with comprehensive distance learning, and Russ Brown did a really great job of talking about how once we hit the metrics that would allow us to reopen, there's a time of transition. So Nate, I think you asked about that. If we got the green light, would we be allowed to turn around and reopen the next day? So if you go back and maybe watch some of his presentation, if you haven't already seen that, that might answer some of those questions. But I so appreciate everyone coming. And I know Southeast Guiding Coalition, there's a big conversation there about the boundaries. And I know that people are working really hard to try to think globally about, as students raised, climate change and carbon footprint and all of that as we do this work. So thank you for bringing your voices and all of your expertise and views into this board meeting tonight. Our board office will follow up with folks as needed. And if you have any further questions, you can always email us or send any materials you have to that email address, publiccomment@pps.net. And again, thank you all for taking the time for your comments this evening. Nathaniel, we're going to move on now to our student rep report, but Nathaniel, you said you didn't have a report for tonight. Is that correct?
Yes, I will resume my reports at the next meeting. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for letting me know that. Superintendent, would you like to share your report with us tonight?
I would. Thank you, Chair Lowry.
And I promise I will be listening, but I'm also going to be munching on a salad, so I'm going to turn my camera off so you all don't see the lettuce in my teeth.
Good evening, directors, and buenas tardes to everyone joining us this evening. So I'll begin with a mention of the 4-week COVID freeze in our case, which begins tomorrow in Multnomah County. To quote the Governor Brown's press release, she stated, "These risk reduction measures are critical in limiting the spread of COVID-19, reducing the risk in communities more vulnerable to serious illness and death, and helping conserve hospital capacity so that all Oregonians can continue to have access to quality care." Serious statement for truly challenging times, and really underlines us being vigilant about measures and steps we can take. So while the guidance being provided by the state and county at this time do not include specific school-related guidance or additional instructions, the need for statewide action and its intended goal of improving or decreasing infection rates and metrics are closely connected to ultimately our ability to reopen classrooms to students. I can assure you there's some nice pictures of our students in a slide presentation. So again, I ask our community to stay vigilant, wear masks, wash your hands frequently, keep socially distant, follow public health guidelines. Doing this is not always easy, particularly as we approach the holidays, but it's absolutely essential to change the trajectory and stop the spread of the virus. That's my PSA. We will continue to rely on our health advisory team, local and county health authorities, and guidance from the Oregon Department of Ed. I really appreciate continuing to hear families' perspectives on the challenges we're all facing. I can assure you that staff every day is being diligent, intentional about considering all available information and developing, modeling any plans or next steps. And we're in common company in confronting these questions, which our ongoing conversations with fellow districts in the state and across the country are all challenged with trying to respond to. So I encourage people, please stay informed with the information posted on our district website. I know that we're making it a point to regularly update directors here at our board meeting. And it's if nothing else, a continually evolving reality in which we're trying to operate and still maintain some level of learning and engagement with our students. On a little different topic, as we find ourselves needing to engage our students in different ways during this pandemic, our community partners have never been so important. Yesterday, we gathered with many of our community partners as well as school principals for what are regular quarterly convenings, especially moving forward. My hope is that in these meetings, we continue to have a table for thought partnership and collaboration where we surface some of the best practices and common challenges, and how even at this time we can deepen our relationships, particularly with our Black, Indigenous, and students of color. We put a great deal of work the last several months into redesigning the RFP process, for instance. My thanks to our RESJ partners who navigated that process with us. The results, and I think you saw these on many of our consent agendas, include a number of things that I think are important to acknowledge and celebrate. PPS now partners with 16 culturally specific and multiracial organizations who are implementing our 5 RESJ strategies, which include culturally specific family engagement, wraparound services, mentoring, leadership development, enrichment and extended learning, as well as positive cultural identity development and advocacy. PPS now invests nearly $9 million. That's a 60% increase from the previous year in our RESJ partnerships. PPS now supports partnerships in over 36 schools, with a focus on our CSI, TSI, and title schools. We've also expanded to our CBO and charter schools with an expressed focus on RESJ, Cairo's, Many Nations Academy, and Rosemary Anderson, for instance. All of our partners have met with our senior advisor on RESJ, Danny Ledesma, school principals, our chief of schools, our regional superintendents, as well as our chief of systems performance to review contracts, the scope of their work and expectations and deliverables. And I've said it before, this is not work we can do alone. Our culturally specific partners, by implementing and placing a focus on these strategies, are going to be essential to us realizing our theory of action and our ability to fully serve BIPOC students and families, particularly in meeting their specific needs, building their trust and their engagement, and ultimately supporting our students reaching their full potential. So I just want to say thank you to our community partners for taking that time to be with us, and to our district and school leaders for coming together. Next slide. I had the great privilege this past week to address the California Association of Black School Educators at their 4th annual conference, one of the largest in the country. This year's theme was a blueprint for education equity. It was an honor to talk to hundreds of Black educators, including many former colleagues. I was really pleased to see that so many of our PPS administrators took up my invitation to attend and participate in the conference. I heard much positive feedback about how much they enjoyed the workshop sessions and discussions focused on better supporting Black student success specifically. I shared with CABC members a bit of the context here the last few months in Portland, given that it's been in the national news a bit. Oftentimes this becomes an incomplete perception. So I also talked about the incredible promise of our students of color and shared the pride about our community developed vision, our theory of action, and how it places a specific commitment to our Black and Native students. I shared our excitement about the recently passed school bond and all that it will mean to our students, in particular, the impact we believe the Center for Black Student Excellence will have. So my thanks to CABC for the opportunity to share a little bit about our Portland story at their annual conference, and for welcoming Oregon neighbors to the wonderful conference. A little more and related to this evening's earlier resolution on this next slide. Later this evening, we're going to move into a board study session on the district's ethnic studies and tribal history curriculum, presented by leaders and members of our humanities team from Curriculum and Instruction. It's particularly appropriate timing given directors commented on this earlier, especially this month as National Native American Indian Heritage Month. So I know our directors enjoy these study sessions, and especially for getting a chance to learn about the lessons that our students get to experience. And then lastly, coming up on the regular agenda, also directors will consider a resolution to approve our student investment account grant agreement. SIA funds are critical to improving our ability to carry out our mission. In fact, SIA funding has made possible much of the work that we'll be discussing in our study session later, including a great deal of curriculum development and professional learning for K-12 ethnic studies and social sciences. So it's my hope, and I know that our directors believe this too, that the SIA, our desire is to see it fully funded for the coming school year, as was pledged to school districts, so that we can fully implement the rather comprehensive investment package of strategies we developed last year with our community and our educators to further support our students, our educators, and our school communities. So thank you, directors. In case I don't get a chance to, I want to wish you and all of our PPS staff and families a safe and happy Thanksgiving. And that concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. We turn now to more reports from the work of the board. As I shared with my colleagues last week, we're going to go alphabetical order by committee and just ask you to share any updates you have on your committee work as chair. And then at the end of that, I'll offer a section for any other work that we might need to bring before one another at this time. So do we have anything from the audit committee tonight?
No report.
All right.
We have a meeting coming up, no report.
Sorry, Julia. How about from the bond committee?
I don't have anything other than from last week. We have an upcoming meeting December 10th, but nothing new to report.
Thank you. CBRC.
We had the first meeting of the year last Thursday. We have a number of new members, so this was a general orientation to how we're going to proceed for the rest of the year.
And I hear we have a student as co-vice chair. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
So that's kind of exciting. Nathaniel's clapping. That's kind of an exciting moment there. So
yeah, looking forward to a productive year. It's a good group.
All right, our Charter and Alternative Programs Committee.
Yes, we had our first meeting of the school year, and on the charter side, we have 2 full renewals this year, which is a pretty detailed process. That's Arthur Academy and the Opal School. We also discussed that the district is just putting out a request for proposals for our community-based alternative programs. We expect to see our existing providers hopefully reapply to continue those same services for students. But it's also a time where we may see some new players in the landscape, and the district has put a particular note out saying that we are looking for those who have creative ideas about serving alternative ways to serve some of our middle school students, because we've lost a couple of providers who had middle school programming, and the number of slots that we have there for kids in that age are very few. So we'll see what comes forward with that. And we talked about how and whether our student investment account dollars are serving students in our alternative programs, and as well as our federal pandemic relief funds through ESSER. There are some glitches around the ESSER funds in that they are not reaching our charter schools. So there's some ways that we're going to work on these issues in terms of advocacy, but the student investment account funds and the services that the superintendent was just referring to in our community-based organizations do serve our kids in our alternative schools. And I think that's about it, but we did, part of what we do discuss is what are the needs of the population of students that tend to gravitate toward our alternative programs? And in this unique moment of distance learning, just generally speaking, are they being met? And do we need to make any changes to make sure that they're being met, and to really focus in on maybe the particular challenges that they might be experiencing? And one of the things that one of the leaders of one of our community-based alternative programs raised is just the extraordinary degree of community violence that we've seen, and gun violence that we've seen, and how it's really affected some of these school populations. And that was Joe McFerrin from Rosemary Anderson, and they've had some really tragic losses in their community of students and families. So these are our kids, these are our families, and it's an important conversation for us to have, to think about, given the circumstances of the time and all the different ways that are unique and bizarre. What are we doing to serve our kids, and do we need to do anything differently? So that's an ongoing conversation that we'll have. Thank you.
All right, intergovernmental.
Nothing to report except an upcoming meeting on December 3rd.
All right. Policy.
We had a policy committee meeting yesterday. We talked about a number of policies. We are continuing pretty extensive conversation to revise the formal complaint policy. And we had a number of comments that staff are going to take back and work on another iteration. We had some conceptual conversations about a couple of policies. One, a new policy that would be responsive to legislation, and the policy is tentatively titled Anti-Racist Learning Communities. And then the second conceptual conversation we had was about a possible policy around the district indemnifying employees for any possible legal proceedings that they may end up being involved in. So both of those are going to be coming back to us at some point. I believe the anti-racist learning communities will be coming back to us fairly soon. And the next policy committee meeting is scheduled for December 7th. That's it.
Any update on the Rose Quarter project?
On the what?
The Rose Quarter project, that was for Julia.
Okay.
No, nothing additional from last report.
All right. Anything from the Southeast Guiding Coalition?
Well, the last meeting on Thursday, a week ago, was interesting. Let me say that. So prior to the meeting, the direction of work was to prepare for an open house that's going to happen this coming Thursday, virtual open house. I think committee members have been under the impression that at least 2 different scenarios were going to be offered for public comment, not as end-all be-all proposals, but as works in progress that would illustrate different ways of meeting the guidelines that the board set out for the committee. Staff decided to limit that to one option, and I think that took a lot of people by surprise. And a number of folks were not happy with that decision. Regardless of the reasons for that, I guess I would say the rationale was not explained well or satisfactorily. Regardless, there will be an open house for people to look at one potential scenario. And the committee will continue to work to get us feeder patterns for 2 middle schools, Kellogg and presumably Harrison Park, as well as the dual language immersion programs to be located at those middle schools. Some of what you heard in terms of public testimony tonight and in letters that board members and staff have received have to do with it's really challenging to do this work one piece at a time when we're in a system where everything is connected to everything else. So there was a lot of concern about, for example, boundaries being decided in this first phase. That will not happen. It is inevitable, though, as the committee and the scenarios they've generated, I don't know, at least a dozen scenarios. And that's mostly the work of the parents and community members on the committee. It's inevitable that when you generate a scenario to try to look at just those feeder patterns, that boundaries come up as a topic of discussion. Because everything's connected, even though those won't be decided right now. So that's part of what we're hearing from the community and feeling like, wow, nobody told us this was happening. That's true, but those boundary decisions won't be made until spring when there will be more school communities included in the discussion. But it is inevitable that if you're talking about changing from a K-8 to a K-5, it's going to change a boundary, and it's pretty natural for people doing the work and getting in the weeds with the numbers to look at those implications going forward. This is a complex task. So I'll leave it at that. I will. Go ahead.
Director Bailey, I just want to clarify, we heard tonight from like a Glencoe parent. So while Glencoe maybe has been discussed, those boundaries won't be officially changed right now. There'll be a further process to have more conversation with the Glencoe community in the spring.
Correct. So the phase one, the decisions being made forwarded to us are which K-5s will feed Kellogg and Harrison Park. I mean, it's not official decision that will be a middle school, but it is really the only viable option, as well as which dual language immersion programs will be located at those schools, which of course has backward implications for which K-5s have which immersion programs. And that's the challenge of trying to do a limited set of decisions when everything's connected to everything else. So I do appreciate the public comments, and I will reply to all of you, and feel free to continue the conversation with me. But I did want to make that clarification.
Director Bailey, I'm wondering if there's, because I'm hearing from a lot of people in the community just being in that sort of heart of Southeast and watching the Southeast guiding coalitions meetings. There doesn't seem to be that clear delineation of this is in scope or out of scope, or this is going to be this spring or not this spring. And so, for example, there's been a lot of discussions of here's a preferred scenario, and it has like Glencoe listed. And of course, people from Glencoe is like, hey, we don't even have anybody on the guiding coalition. How come you're talking about our school? So it seems like being really clear about what's in scope and knowing that there are this interconnectedness, what's in scope and out of scope for this first set of decisions, I think will be helpful to the community, because right now people are feeling like, hey, stuff's happening, we weren't at the table and we don't know what's going on, and the school district never told us anything. And it seems like if there's just more clarity of this is the specific task, and we know it's connected to a lot of other things that's going to come later, but if you just watch the meetings, that's not necessarily clearly delineated.
Yeah, and I'd agree with that. And I think that's good feedback for staff. Again, you've been sitting in, I've been sitting in, Director Moore has been sitting in as observers. Staff are guiding the process. We're certainly talking with staff and giving feedback, but that's in terms of the board's role and staff's role. It's staff's role to run the process. Yeah. So and that's and again, when you start with a scenario and you tell people to think creatively, then the discussion of whether Mount Tabor should change from feeding Franklin to feeding Madison pops up, and then which schools would feed into Mount Tabor if there were changes along those lines come up, because people are thinking creatively and trying to look at the whole picture. And I'm sure that took some people by surprise, and it's only come up in the last, I believe the last 2 meetings, that was a topic of discussion. And that's just one, it's a good sign that we have this committee and people are taking their charge seriously and really trying to look at problems creatively, or solutions creatively. And on the other hand, again, communication communication on this issue is difficult anyway, but in the time of COVID, it's tremendously so. If you know, maybe many parents know that this is happening, probably some don't, or they saw it and it, wasn't top of mind when the notice came through. That's just always been the nature of communication around school issues in my 20 years of activism. And then all of a sudden something comes up and it feels like, wow, where did this come from? And if you weren't like engaged in going to YouTube and watching the meetings, you wouldn't have seen this progression of the discussion as it went along.
Right, it'd be like, hey, that's Kellogg. I'm not anywhere near that.
Exactly.
Check, I don't need to engage because it's like not having an impact. So I think being more deliberate in how we communicate if there are larger impacts.
So I'll probably write something up a little more detailed for board members to kind of add some context to this as well. But I do urge people to attend the open house, board members as observers, and everybody out there in the public to go in, take a look. And of course, it's pretty natural to come to these things through your own lens and the lens of your family and your children. I hope along with that, we take the bigger picture look of trying to increase equity and equitable programming in this transition going forward, because this will, at the end of the day, we will be addressing and clearing up a lot of historic inequities. I'll stop there because we got more to do, right?
All right. Yes. Any other committee or conference reports that need to be shared by our board members?
Just one more. I sat in on a meeting around the design process for Benson and the MPG. Things are rolling right along. There's inevitably there's been some changes. I don't know, Julia, I know you were kind of you look preoccupied when the meeting was going on, because I know you have a lot going on in all your other responsibilities. But there's been a little bit of a change in not the building so much as where programs are located in the MPG. There's discussion going on there. And with Benson, the latest challenge, and we had a good discussion, was on the location of elevators. And again, we're dealing with a building that wasn't built with accessibility in mind and has very little accessibility right now. And how to locate elevators in kind of a cramped, an existing building shell in a sense, and increase accessibility through the building. And staff certainly has a plan that meets the code with one exception of 2 classrooms that would not be accessible. But we discussed doing more than meeting code and really stepping closer to our vision of being increased accessibility, because the current plan would be quite a workaround in some cases for if students run crutches or in wheelchair. From getting A to B would be quite a bit longer walk in some cases. So staff is going to take a look at some other ways of doing it. It's a big challenge and might end up costing more, substantially more to do that. But I count on the creativity of OSM and our partners in that work.
All right, any further committee or conference reports? All right, now, some of you may have a little bit of a sense of deja vu. because you might think that we already approved the student investment account, and we did. On October 20th, this board reviewed and approved the SIA grant agreement consistent with the guidance issued by ODE at that time. On November 6th, ODE issued additional guidance on the approval process. And although we allowed for public comment on the October 20th consent agenda, the clarifying guidance now requires that the grant agreement be approved as a standalone item. And due to this updated information, we will have the SIA grant agreement as a separate agenda item with another opportunity for public comment in order to be in full compliance with the statutory requirements as issued on November 6th. The agreement that was previously approved by this board on October 20th is unchanged. Superintendent Guerrero, would you like to present this agenda item?
You're right, Chair Lowry, it can seem a little bit like deja vu, but we want to make sure we're by the book here and we don't get called out on any technicalities. So you're going to get another opportunity to hear from Deputy Superintendent Hertz. And we also have with us this evening Leslie Odell, who we save for only special occasions, this being one of them. We like to keep her really focused on matters at hand. So you have the two of them next.
Good evening. It is a great occasion to receive additional funding from our state legislature in support of our strategic plan that we're in the process of finalizing at Portland Public Schools. And we have already invested in many items this for the 2021 year. So we are appreciative of having that opportunity to support our students with counselors and classroom teachers and social workers and many investments along the way. So with that, you have had a full presentation. We've had a full community engagement process throughout the past year. And we just really are coming back to dot the I and cross the T to make it a regular agenda item rather than a consent agenda item. So we bring that to you for your approval.
Come on, Leslie, you're not going to leave us hanging. You must have something you can add.
Yes, I do. We are still looking for what the reporting specifics are, and we hope to have those very soon. ODE is working diligently, and they've been incredibly responsive in this time whenever we have questions or concerns or want to know what the timelines are. So we look forward to sharing the details on that reporting with you soon. And with that, again, we're just very excited for the opportunity and how under our superintendent's leadership, all of this is working towards achieving our strategic plan.
All right, thank you, Deputy Superintendent Hertz and Director Odell. Do I have a motion and second to adopt Resolution 6208, resolution to approve the Student Investment Account Grant Agreement?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, I didn't catch who did that. Was that, I think, was that Director DePass that moved it?
I think it was DePass and Brim Edwards, but I'll take it.
Okay, so we'll say DePass moved and Constam seconded the adoption of Resolution 6208. Is there any board discussion on this item?
Just as a reminder, Deputy Superintendent Hertz, what's the additional resources that we're receiving as a district?
Leslie Odell, I didn't open that all up for this evening. I believe it's 12 million, if I got that right, in the latest version.
Yes, it is. It's the exact amount I will look up, but it's a little over $12 million that's invested most certainly for specifically for support in mental health services, given the specifics of what's going on currently, as well as some additional supports for reading and math support at our CSI schools.
And then just as a further note, the reason why we reduced the amount in this SIA is because the legislature made a decision instead to put more money, more of the Student Success Act money into the state school funds and the base funding amount.
We did keep a lot of our investments and did use general fund dollars to support the strategic plan, where we saw reductions in the SIA grant funding. We did see an increase in general fund funding, so we were able to continue many of our investments that we had prioritized in our adopted budget process.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? All right. I'm going to go ahead and ask if there's any public comment on this item. Ms. Bradshaw.
No, there's not.
All right, the board will now vote on resolution 6208, resolution to approve the student investment account grant agreement. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
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 All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Are there any abstentions? Resolution 6208 is approved by a vote of 7-0 with Student Representative Shu voting.
Yes.
Thank you, Nathaniel. All right, I'm going to take a look here at our meeting time. It looks like we have 2 more items before we head into our study session. Will it be okay to take a break after those items, or do you all want to break now?
After.
After.
After's good. Thank you.
Well, we will move on to Superintendent Guerrero. Would you like to introduce this next item?
I'm assuming you're talking about continuing on with the conversation about the GO bonds.
Yes, the next item is the general obligation bonds and related matters. Sorry.
Just double checking, because I know we also have some guests for that item as well. So, which I think Deputy Superintendent Claire Hertz will help to understand, to introduce. And I think you know some of these characters already. Claire?
Yes. Happy to bring before you a resolution to authorize the sale for the 2020 bond program. On November 3rd, our community approved $1.2 billion on a ballot measure to issue general obligation bonds. Tonight we have with us our bond counsel, Golgan Ure of Hawkins, Delafield and Wood, and financial advisor Carol Samuels of Piper Sandler. And together with the finance and school modernization leadership team, we have created an initial plan for issuing the bonds in 3 sales over 6 years based on our initial budgets for the projects and cash flow projections. So tonight, I am going to ask both Carol Samuels and Golgan Ure to speak to the board. We're going to start with Carol Samuels, and Roseanne is going to bring up a PDF report on the levy rate analysis and the plan for our sale. And so with that, I would like to turn it over to Carol Samuels as Roseanne is bringing up, if we can start on the beginning slide. Thank you. Go ahead, Carol.
Great. Well, good evening, everybody. I love being referred to as a character. So do I have control of this presentation, or do I need to say
next page and you're ready to go?
Okay, I am ready. So before I get started, let me just again say congratulations to all of you about not just getting the largest bond issue in Oregon history approved, but by a eye-popping rate of approval at 75%. It's just gives me faith in my community. As Claire mentioned, we are putting a bond issue together, and we're putting it together fairly quickly, largely because of what this table shows. In the overall graph, what you're seeing is historical interest rates all the way back to 1996. If you look in the upper right, you can see the 1-year inset. And the inescapable conclusion is that interest rates are at super, super low levels. In fact, the last time you sold bonds was in April, and you can see if you squint at that small graph that in April, rates which we thought of as all-time lows were higher than they are today. So our plan at this moment is to put the bond issue together with a goal of selling the bonds in mid-December, and we will see whether or not the market continues to be strong. One of the best things about having sold bonds so recently is putting it together is not that much additional labor, although Claire and her staff might disagree with that assessment. In any case, if you could move forward to the next slide. So this is probably too small to read, but what you see here is a table of the different measurements of property values that affect taxation for Portland Public School residents. The first column shows the real market value. After this was finalized, we did get 2021 values for at least Multnomah County. We're still waiting on Washington County, and that is increased by a fairly robust 4.1%. And in the far right column, you can see the assessed value. As I'm sure you all know, it is the assessed value that determines the tax rate, and that too is growing robustly and higher rates than what we had been projecting previously, which is partially by design. We like to be conservative, but it's nice to see that level of growth even in the middle of a pandemic. Next slide. And I should mention, I don't mean this to be a lecture. If folks have questions as I go forward, don't hesitate to interrupt me. So the top table here shows the district's outstanding debt at approximately $830 million. It consists of multiple series sold under the 2 prior authorization. The first was November 2012. The last series of that was sold in 2017. And then in May of 2017 was the approval for the last bond measure for $790 million. We sold the last portion of that in April. The table at the bottom shows your legal debt capacity. And even though it may feel like you have a lot of debt, by state standards, you actually have issued very little of your capacity. Your capacity is about $11 billion, and you've issued, $11 billion. You've issued about 830 million of it, so about 8% of that. Next slide. This is a graph of your existing levy rates, as well as a projection of what the levy rates will be in subsequent years, assuming no additional debt is issued. So the dark blue is historic, and you can see starting in 2018 is hovering around that $2.50. Again, the assessed value of the district has grown at a faster clip than what we had assumed, and that causes the levy rate associated with the bonds to be somewhat below $2.50. The lighter blue with the orange and light blue and yellow just breaks out the different series of bonds, and by design, we arranged the last set of debt issues to have a drop in 2022 so that you could layer a new bond issue on top. Next slide. So as Claire mentioned, of the $1.2 billion that voters approved, we have devised a strategy that is pretty flexible, except for the first bond issue, of breaking the sale into 3 separate series. We believe at this point, this gives you the most flexibility to deal with unforeseen circumstances, both in construction timelines as well as tax rates, etc. The first issue is going to be approximately $365 million. As I mentioned previously, we are looking at selling those bonds in December, assuming the market is helpful. And the term is going to be about 25 years. By design, if you look at the third column in from the left, you can see that we have layered new bonds on top to once again bring the levy rate back to $2.50, and each subsequent issue has a drop, allowing us to layer on top that additional bond issue for the grand total of $1.2 billion and change, with $2.50 for the first 4 years, and then a drop thereafter to allow for the next bond authorization. And if those are way too small and too many numbers to digest, if you go to the next slide, you can see that translated into a picture. Again, to orient you, the dark blue are actual levy rates. The gray takes your existing debt and color codes it in one color. And then the various shades of blue is the new authorization, building again that staircase so that starting in November of 24, you could go back on the ballot and ask for the next increment. Next slide. Actually, I think that's it.
I just want to give the board an opportunity to ask questions before we have our bond council. Golgan, you're present the resolution.
Thanks, Carol. This is Director Constam. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Could you please explain how you arrived at the amount for this first tranche? It's significantly more than the second tranche when we would actually be paying construction bills as opposed to design development. So just explain a little bit how you arrived at those figures other than trying to optimize these great rates.
Well, Director Constam, by legal standards, and Golgan can talk more about this, you actually could issue substantially more right now. Roughly around 600 million would be legal under federal tax law standards. However, our feeling was that that locked you in much too significantly to managing your construction timing based upon a very significant bond issue, and that 400 or so million was significant enough, and that breaking it into multiple pieces gave you much more flexibility to deal with unforeseen contingencies.
And what do you mean exactly locked you into a construction time frame? Because is there amount of time in which you actually have to spend it?
Yeah, so Director Constam, hi, I'm Gulgan. I'm bond counsel to the district. And under the federal tax law, districts, all local governments are permitted to borrow on a tax exempt basis, which allows you to get the best interest rate for your voters. But there are a number of rules that come with that designation. And one of them is that the district, the borrower, needs to reasonably expect to spend a certain percentage of proceeds within 3 years.
Got it. Makes sense. Thank you very much.
Just to clarify Director Constam's question, though, I just want to make sure I'm following, because you said that the first tranche was larger than the second tranche, but we're looking at a $364 million sale, followed by a $540 million sale, followed by a roughly $300 million sale. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
My mistake, Andrew.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I was not looking at the wrong numbers. I have a few questions, but they might be more along the resolution, so I'm happy to wait for the remainder of the presentation, if that makes sense.
Let's go ahead, Galvin.
Sure. So, the resolution, directors, as you can tell, is relatively straightforward. You've done the vast majority of the hard work in terms of getting this in front of the voters and passed. And this is really a short resolution which permits staff to do all of the administrative things that need to be done in order to sell the bonds. So as you can see, the majority of the resolution is these lettered paragraphs, A through L, and these are all the various steps that need to be taken between now and the time that districts gets money from the bond investors. And I'm happy to take specific questions.
So I'm going to ask the question that a layperson would ask, since we just spent several months talking to our community about it. So if you were to sum all this up, it essentially allows us, it's the first step in the issuance of the $1.2 billion in bond that will leave the tax rate essentially the same for a property owner.
That's right. So this resolution authorizes staff to take the administrative steps, but staff is absolutely bound by what's in the ballot title. So only the projects that are described in the ballot title are the ones that are permitted to be financed.
So this isn't any sort of change. It's just implementing what we already told the voters we are going to do, and the tax rates staying the same. Ultimately, we have the same amount of bonds that we're going to issue. This is just the first wave.
That is absolutely correct.
Because you've been conservative in how you've projected assessment values, and given what's happened in the property market, it's likely, or there's a fair chance that we'd end up slightly under that $2.50 value going forward.
Yeah, Director Bailey, good evening. Nice to see you. We have been assuming a blanket 3% growth rate. So to the extent assessed values grow above 3%, then the levy would be below $2.50.
Were you suggesting that we borrow another $9 billion because interest rates are low? No.
How are we told voters?
I do enjoy spending time with you, so sure.
And Claire, oh, I'm sorry, Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, and just to follow up for future meetings, looking ahead and looking at what kind of a bond we could look forward to in 2024 in terms of how much is left, how many years, kind of thing. We've got 2 more high schools that we'll be planning to do, plus potential work at Roosevelt as well, for a future bond, as well as a whole passel of K-5s and middle schools that are in desperate need of being modernized. So it'd be great to kind of have that vision of what that next step would broadly look like in terms of how many buildings we can take on going forward.
So that work is being done by your Office of School Modernization team, and that we will be bringing forward more information about a long-term facility plan, an update to that. So
Awesome.
that will be coming soon.
Thank you.
So Claire, would it also be accurate to draw a line between this decision to sell these bonds at this time and the work that we silently concluded at the beginning of the meeting on our cash management policy, allowing us more flexibility, because we're going to have to park this somewhere, for lack of a better term?
So earlier this evening on the consent agenda, we did ask you to continue the waiver in percentage, basically for us to hold in money market accounts and banks. And we've added a couple of additional banks. All of our banks are approved through the state of Oregon Treasury Office. So we have a limited list of banks that we're allowed to use, but we are adding more because there is the timing of the year. This is when we receive all of our property tax collections all in a month for the whole year. At the same time, we're selling bonds so we can start the 2020 bond program. So we did, it is the 2 consent agenda items and this action item to authorize the sale of bonds definitely are part of a whole plan to manage the bond proceeds.
Thank you.
So if I can jump in, just a couple of questions. One, so the bond, the resolution allows the CFO to engage in either a competitive sale or a negotiated sale. Has PPS ever done a negotiated sale for our bonds?
Carol would know that better than I would.
Yeah, certainly not in recent memory. Not since the 2012 authorization was approved.
Okay. I'm comfortable with that in terms of making sure we're getting the best deal. What I would just ask, not a change to the resolution, but if in fact we were thinking about a negotiated sale, I would be interested in just the board being notified about that. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but I mean, GFOA criteria around negotiated sales generally something we would not fall into, because again, we have very good credit. It's very straightforward. It's full faith and credit, and something that we go back relatively routinely. So I would assume we're headed towards a competitive sale, but if that changes, it would be great just as an information point to know.
And if, go ahead. So I was going to say, Director, just as a point of information, we like to include the option for negotiated sale just to have maximum flexibility if something happens like a catastrophe where there's no access to the markets or the market sees up.
Right. No, and that makes total sense to me, which is why I'm comfortable with the resolution. It's just more of a knowing if something along those lines, just being informed about that. And then this next set of questions, I want to get into a little bit of the premium bond issue. And I think this is important because there's been some media coverage around this that in my view was a little misleading and sensationalist. And so I think it's important as we are in a public meeting and talking about this to be really clear about what we're doing and very intentional about what we're doing. So this resolution does delegate the authority, to our Chief Financial Officer to Deputy Superintendent Hertz to go out to the market and really sort of get the best deal possible. And one of those deals might be a premium bond, particularly in a low interest rate environment like we're in. We have seen, higher premiums than we necessarily would expect. And I want to be, really clear, again, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but, what a premium bond does is it doesn't increase the principal that we're borrowing, but it does add a premium onto it. And generally when you're being offered that premium by Wall Street, you are paying a slightly higher interest rate. The alternative is to not get a premium bond and have a lower interest rate. And I just want to be really clear about the fact that we as a board could make the policy choice to prohibit the district from buying premium bonds. We could say, you know, we don't want to do premium bonds. We just want to do a straight up bond sale and not engage in that. The result of that would be potentially a lower interest rate than we would otherwise get. However, we would also lose out on that premium. We as a board through this resolution are not choosing to do that. And one of the implications in the media coverage that frustrated me was it sort of implied that there was something hidden or nefarious about this tool and this policy. And I just want to be really clear publicly. This is all very transparent. It's very above board. And we as a board through this resolution are deciding to in fact get the best deal possible for the district. That might be a lower interest rate, or it might be a premium bond with a slightly higher interest rate. I think the most important thing, and we talked about it already in this meeting, is that we have committed to the voters to keep that tax rate at $2.50, you know, or below. And that really is a policy direction. It's not a legal direction as a result of our bond approval, but it is a policy direction that we as a district have adopted and that this plan adheres to. And I think that to be really clear, is one of the most important things, and frankly, one of the things that I think our taxpayers really care about, which is that we went out and said, you know, we estimate this won't, you know, increase your tax rate above 250. If we are able in this low interest rate environment to keep that tax rate where it is and get a premium on top of it, which will allow more flexibility and potentially more projects, I think that's actually a really, really good thing. And again, it is definitely a policy decision. And I just want to make that really clear that what we're doing tonight is authorizing that possibility, a possibility that I am not only comfortable with, I think is actually the right decision for us as a district to make. Did I get all of that right, Deputy Superintendent Hertz or Carol?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
I appreciate that, Director Scott, because it makes it all pretty easy to understand. And in fact, we have benefited greatly on our 2012 bond with the premiums that we did reap from that we were able to invest back into modernizing our schools.
Right, benefited greatly and without increasing the tax rate above what we told the voters we would be.
So if I may.
Sorry, I was going to just ask Carol if there was any further discussion before we move on to vote at this time.
First of all, I appreciate Director Scott bringing this up because it does give us guidance that's very helpful. If I'm going to engage in technical nerdiness, effectively, what a premium would do is give you additional proceeds at a higher interest rate. That's correct. But what you wouldn't want to do is tell the market that you refuse to accept the higher interest rate, because particularly in a competitive environment, that's what they are going to bid. So your choice is not mandating that they have to give you a lower interest rate, because that would effectively increase your costs because you're asking for something that's not standard in the market, but rather reducing the size that you are selling. So it ends up in the same place where the levy rate is the focus and the amount you get can be used for projects. But since we are in a public meeting, I just wanted to clarify that point.
I appreciate that. Thanks.
All right, are we ready to bring this motion before us? Do I have a motion and second to adopt Resolution 6209, resolution authorizing the sale of general obligation bonds and related matters?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, so Director Scott moves and Director Constam seconds the adoption of Resolution 6209. Is there any further board discussion? All right, Ms. Bradshaw, is there any public comment?
No.
All right. The board will now vote on Resolution 6209, resolution authorizing the sale of general obligation bonds and related matters. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
Yes. All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Are there any abstentions? Resolution 6209 is approved by a vote of 7-0, with Student Representative Shu voting.
Yes.
All right, thank you, Nathaniel. And thank you to Carol and to Golgan and to Deputy Superintendent Hertz for answering our questions and bringing that presentation for us.
Well, and thank you. It's an exciting time to bring this to our community.
Yeah, and this is not my wheelhouse, so I very much appreciate Director Scott clarifying and asking those questions in a way that helped me further understand as well. I'm always thankful for the wisdom and expertise of my board colleagues. All right.
Chair, I was going to say the same thing. This represents a really important moment for our directors and continuing to follow through on a very recent election that just occurred. So I just want to make sure that we're recognizing that occasion as you're doing. And so appreciate having the counsel of the esteemed Carol Samuels and Golgan here with us to keep us informed and on track. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Congratulations.
Right. Good night, everyone.
It's good night for you, but we still have another meeting.
Oh, I know. We should say good luck.
Thank
Not sticking around.
Thanks both.
We're going to get to play with some social studies curriculum after this, so that's exciting. All right, well, as we appreciate the wisdom and insight of our own board, we also appreciate the wisdom and insight that we get from the Oregon School Boards Association, or as we commonly refer to it, OSBA. This is organized as one general state association with up to 23 regionally elected representatives established across 14 geographic regions to support school boards. In even-numbered years, member boards vote to elect regional representatives for odd-numbered positions. And we talked about this a little last week when we had Michael Sonnleitner with us, and also when Katrina Doherty was with us in October. So tonight we are going to be voting on candidates for position 17 and position 19 of the Oregon School Boards Association Board. The board will now vote on those positions. Board members were provided the nomination form and resumes of all three candidates, and we heard from the two candidates in the contested election for position number 17. Do I have a motion for either Katrina Doherty from MESD or Michael Sonnleitner from Portland Community College?
I'd like to move to elect Katrina Doherty for the position.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Okay, so Director DePass has moved and Director Bailey has seconded a motion in favor of Katrina Doherty. Is there any discussion on this motion, this motion?
I wanted to explain my rationale, and we had two very qualified candidates that have diverse experience from one another. I wanted to move forward Katrina Doherty's name because she's a youthful voice. She's a woman and she's got public health experience. I think will be very valuable. And I think that she's the type of leader I'd like to see on the OSBA. She also brings a really strong equity lens to the work. And of course, I value that in her youthful way of pushing things forward. I think will be really valuable.
Yeah, I think one of the great advantages Katrina brings is just getting to know her perspective, and because she's of a younger age than I am, she sees things in a different way, and that's been really refreshing. And I feel like I've learned a lot from her, just being with her at OSBA conferences and in other places. Any other discussion on this motion?
Yes, if I may. So I have to say I've been struggling with this decision because I can make strong arguments for both of these candidates. I think they represent kind of system partners to school districts. On the one hand, MESD, on the other hand, PCC. And I think those are both kind of institutional partners that we could benefit, whose presence on the OSBA board I think would be beneficial. I think in particular the absence of representation from community colleges on the OSBA board is somewhat problematic. As far as I know, there's been at best only spotty representation over many years, I think. And it's a voice that we really need to pay more attention to. We've got to come up with ways that where there's more integration from preschool through college. That being said, it's, you know, I mean, both of the people I think they made sort of compelling arguments, and having a younger voice on the OSBA board would also be a useful addition to the conversation, I think. And Katrina did yeoman's work on the Preschool for All ballot measure. So it's been a difficult decision for me. I wish we could have both of them on, but I think on balance, I would support Katrina Dowdy's candidacy.
All right, any further discussion here? All right, all in favor of the motion to elect Katrina Doughty, please indicate by saying yes.
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 Sorry. All opposed, please indicate by saying no. All right, the motion passes 7-0 with Student Representative Shu voting
yes.
All right. We move on now to Sonia Mckenzie from Park Rose, who is running unopposed for position 19. And I've gotten to know Sonia a little bit, again, through some of the OSBA work, and she is just phenomenal. And so I'm really excited that she's willing to serve again. All in favor of Sonia, please indicate by saying yes.
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 Do we need a motion?
You know, it's not in my script, but do we, Liz?
Liz is nodding her head yes.
Okay.
You took one on the last position. You should take one on this one.
Okay.
It's unopposed. It's form over substance.
I move for us to support Sonia Groves.
Okay, so Director Bailey moves that we support Sonia Mckenzie. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, was that Director Moore? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, all in favor of Sonia Mckenzie, please indicate by saying yes.
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 Yes. All opposed, please indicate by saying no. The motion passes 7-0 with Student Representative Shu voting
yes.
all right.
So can I just say, had we had an opportunity to speak to this, I would have said it's a very enthusiastic yes for me. Sonia's done some great work in a very short time. She's a hugely influential presence in OSBA, and I'm grateful that she's there and willing to do this. So,
Rita, do you still serve on the Legislative and Policy Committee for OSBA?
I do.
All right, and next week we will be looking at the legislative priorities. Not next week, in 2 weeks at our next board meeting, we will be looking at the OSBA legislative priorities and passing those. So be looking forward to some more OSBA action on the agenda. All right, is there any other business we need to deal with before we adjourn this meeting, take a break and head over to our study session? All right, well then, the next board meeting will be held December 1st. And this meeting is adjourned and we'll now move into our board study session. Let's take a 10-minute break. So maybe actually, let's take a 10-minute break and get back about 8:17. Does that sound good to folks? Okay, I'll see you in 10 minutes.